My name is John Facella. Most of you know me from the past. I'm past president of RCA, sort of retired, but not really. And I enjoy doing this and getting you a chance to meet with some industry notables. John Suzuki is the CEO and a director at BK Technologies, and we're going to get into some interesting questions with him. And then, as per usual, after the 30-minute approximately, we'll switch it over to questions. So if you have questions along the way during the first 30 minutes, please send them in the chat or the Q&A, and Barney will scroll through them and prepare to ask John those questions later. For those of you that don't know, RCA has been around more than 100 years. It's a very old institution, and all of the industry notables, all the way from the 20s through the present day, have been members. So it's a wonderful organization, a lot of history, and we keep pushing the envelope for new stuff. So one of the reasons we hold these interview series is to give you timely information about new areas of wireless. And so we're going to get into that in a moment. So without further ado, John, why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little background, please?
Well, thanks, John, and thank you for hosting me this evening. You know, it's funny, I was thinking back on my career, and it's coming up to 40 years now, which I find extremely hard to believe. I certainly remember, like it was yesterday, filling in punch cards for my computer program. So it'll give you some idea of the time I went through university. But I had the fortunate, I guess, opportunity to spend my entire career in this land mobile radio industry. I started with Motorola Communications in Canada, and then moved down to the States with General Electric. And of course, that turned into Ericsson and now L3 Harris. I also spent time with JVC Kenwood, with the E.F. Johnson Company, which is owned by JVC Kenwood, and then most recently with BK Technologies. And BK Technologies, as you know, is a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange, and the opportunity to be a CEO of a publicly traded company was certainly too good to pass up. So definitely, probably more years than I like to admit, but I would say it was a very exciting career, and I couldn't be part of a better industry.
Great. So let's talk about the industry. What made you go into wireless?
So I graduated in electrical engineering, and so I had a general interest in radio. In fact, one of the classes that I took in university that was most applicable and I enjoyed the most was a class on antenna theory. And so we actually built our own directional antennas, and then we were able to bring our antennas up to an antenna farm and actually graph the patterns of the antenna pattern. And at the time that I was doing it, you know, I just thought it was just interesting how you can design these things. Little did I know that that was probably the best class that I ever took in university as it applied to my career. It was certainly a lot of fun. So it was just a general interest. I was very fortunate that Motorola Communications gave me an opportunity to interview. I grabbed it. And when they offered a job, I certainly didn't hesitate to say, yes, thank you. So that's how I started.
So it was essentially the first job out of college, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So talking about younger people today who are just thinking about wireless or maybe going to get into it, what obstacles do you see that they might confront?
You know, I don't know if I would say obstacles. Wireless was, going back 40 years, was pretty much a niche type of industry, and it was really held by government agencies or in some cases commercial agencies that had licenses, but it wasn't really generally understood in the public domain. Today, I mean, the kids are raised on wireless devices, and so, you know, I think it's a pretty easy thing for kids graduating school, whether it's in engineering or it's in business or marketing. The applications of wireless and the impact wireless has made on our lives is so dramatic. I think that it's easier today to find varying careers if you take the wireless industry as a whole. If you take land mobile radio, it's a little bit more narrow, but certainly wireless is more generally understood today than when I was going through school. So I think there are great opportunities for young people to participate in this industry.
I agree with you. And a couple of years ago, we put together a video aimed essentially at students from high school on up, and telling them about the many careers in wireless. And in putting that together, it was really interesting because you quickly get away from the technicians and engineers, and then you start thinking about real estate, you start thinking about marketing, you start thinking about training, it goes on and on. There's really so many um, functional roles in wireless. I mean, real estate is one that I hadn't originally thought of, but sure, tower sites are still being built out. 5G doesn't go as far as 2G went. So, there's a whole need to continually change that. And now it's moved more towards building tops. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. So, what do you think young people should do to prepare for a wireless career? Do you have any suggestions?
I kind of wish I did. That's a really good question, Sean. I think it's like any career people choose. Sometimes you just kind of back into a career because you're unsure. I have three children, and I certainly went through, like most parents go through, with children not knowing what they want to do. It's very rare, I think, kids really know what they want to do in their career, but they all have passions, right? And of course, today I think you have a better chance in following your passion and making a living at it than I think you had in the past as well. There's just so many different opportunities. I think that, like in any career that you may want to choose to enter, always finding people in that industry and setting up some mentorships or just networking is always the best way. There's nothing better than to ask a person who's in that career area, in that industry, you know, questions like you're asking me, and it gives you a good idea of whether or not this is the right fit for you. But my advice to any young person is follow your passions, and it's a life venture. For myself, that's what I did, and I was very fortunate, and I've enjoyed my career and what opportunities it's afforded me.
Yeah, just to build on that a little bit, we have a mentoring program within RCA. We started that some years ago, and it was very powerful for those people. And we had several different kinds of young people that some were in college, some were actually out of college, and we paired them up with some interesting people in the industry who agreed to do it. And so far, we've gotten some good reviews. People appreciated that ability, and of course, because we live in the Zoom age, so to speak, it can all be done virtually. It doesn't have to be people meeting one another, which is difficult, especially when we started. It was right after COVID. So that's just a little plug for RCA's mentor program. So, John, you traveled your career through succeeding positions of increasing authority, and eventually you got to the CEO level. Why don't you tell people a little bit about what you do as a CEO of BK Technologies, and also some of the qualities that you think are important in that role model, role level, excuse me.
Sure. So I've been CEO of BK Technologies now coming up to 4 years. It is a publicly traded company, which is actually what attracted me to this company. So one thing, you don't get exposed to if you're, running a company, you could be a president or a CEO of a company, but that's part of a larger company, is you don't get that investor relations interface. And so once a quarter, I'm responsible for reporting to the street what our financial results are, following SEC guidelines. And then, of course, you have a number of shareholders. At BK, for example, 40% of our shares are held by institutional investors. And so a big part of my job is to tell the story of BK and why I believe it's a good place to invest, we believe we're growing, and why they should consider continuing to be a shareholder or to become a shareholder. Be that promotion for the company. And that gives us a lot of ability, being a publicly traded company. If we needed to raise capital to make some sort of investment, it's much easier for us to go to the capital markets and request funds. And of course, if they know who you are, they've been following you, if there's an opportunity to buy a portion of the company through some sort of capital raise, then they're more willing to do that. So I would say that's the number one task of my job. The other part of it is just working with the various executives that I have, and transversing some of the challenges we had, such as COVID and the supply chain crisis, through what we're experiencing now on tariffs. Helping and counseling the executive team to kind of guide us through those different challenges. And then, of course, the growth aspect of it. The company has over doubled the size of the revenues since I joined in 21. So I'm very pleased with the performance, and our stock over the last year has gone up about 300%. So the shareholders are recognizing the work that we're doing. So I think that's a big part of my job. In terms of things that qualities, it's a good question. I think people recognize leadership quality through individuals who communicate well, who follow up on what they say. Most of my time is really mentoring the other leaders that I have in the company, and putting together a true team. So these are things that I would say most people would say when asked that question, because it's true, right? When you get to these places, I remember going through my career, my bosses would tell me how important it is, the people side of things, right? To understand individuals and be able to work with people and finding the right positions for people. It's absolutely true. I can certainly attest to that, because that is absolutely the biggest part of the job.
It is always about people. You're right.
It is always about people.
That has been my experience as well. So, because we're talking about the land mobile industry, let's talk a little bit about changes that you've seen in your career since you first joined, when you joined way back when with Motorola. What's changed in the wireless industry?
I think that's easy for me. So when I started, putting in a city system was a big deal, and a city communication system. And your biggest concern was that the fire department and the police department may not want to participate on the same radio system. They typically had their own different radio systems. They couldn't even be on the same band. They have to be on different frequency bands so far away. And that's how I started my career. I remember doing a presentation in the early 90s at a APCO conference about the advantages of having a wide area trunk radio system. And at that time, we were promoting and talking about systems as large as a state. And it was fairly well attended, but this was in the early 90s, when trunking was still new, and people were maybe going from city systems to maybe county systems. But the thought of doing a radio system that spanned an entire state was was still way out there. And why would you need to do that anyways? Why do you need to talk from one end of the state to the other? Still, that's a good point. Why do you? What people fail to understand, and probably understand better today, is having a common radio system. Your adjacency is always the next county, but their county is yet another county, and so on. Before you know it, you're covering the entire state. So although there's maybe not a need to talk from one end of the state to the other, the fact that all the counties and all the cities are covered by a common radio system does wonders for interoperability and cross communications. And so that's why we see pretty much every state has a statewide system. So to answer your question, John, the evolution of radio from being a single repeater or a group of repeaters covering a city on a specific agency to covering a state with multiple agencies under a common, hundreds of thousands of users on a system is what I've seen over the last 40 years.
Myself as well. I remember when I first joined Motorola, I was in the Atlanta area office, and the big deal at the time was the Atlanta Police Department was going to put in a receiver voting system to improve the coverage for portables. And this was pre-trunking, of course. And, my boss at the time was ecstatic. He actually designed the system, as I remember. And, it was a big deal at that time to all of a sudden we got these portables, but they don't talk very far and so forth. So you're absolutely right. And then Trunky came along and
changed the game.
It absolutely changed the game, but it took a while. A lot of people were not believers. And of course, we had the trunking wars between GE Ericsson and Motorola. Well, we will go into that. Let's talk some about your company. You've been in business for 70 years, according to your website. How do you fit into the land mobile market, and how do you compete with the likes of L3Harris and Motorola?
So I guess I kind of grew up in the mainstream LMR. So having worked for both Motorola and what is L3Harris today, primarily, and of course E.F. Johnson, I thought I knew everything about radio, to be honest. And then I came to BK and I really learned that there was a segment of the market that I had no clue. So I would say BK Technologies' origins was servicing the wildland fire market. And for those who don't know about that market, just turn on your news and you'll hear about a wildland fire fairly soon. We're right in the beginning part of that season. A couple of factoids, right? 50 or 60,000 first responders or support staff fight fires every year. The number of fires are in the thousands that take place. And of course, the largest ones we see on TV. I think what's interesting about that industry, and BK has been there from day one, and from a market share standpoint, we have, I don't know, there's like 250,000 radios deployed for wildland fire use, right? So it's fair amount of radios. Still a drop in the bucket to the maybe 6 or 7 million radios of like public safety land mobile radios that are out there in the overall industry. But BK has a huge market share. It's about 90%, and we've had that over the duration. And I question, like, why, right? Why does BK have such a strong stranglehold on it? And it comes back to understanding a little bit about the dynamics of setting up a communication system for covering a wildland fire. So what I'm used to is you put up a radio system for a city or a county or multi-county state, doesn't matter. But it's a defined area, and you build out your radio towers and you build out your coverage, and there you go. That's where you operate it, and that's where it is. Wildland fire can take place anywhere, mostly where communications is non-existent. And so they have to stand up these communication systems. They're all conventional. It's all repeater-based, multi-repeaters. But if you can imagine a team of people who are basically dropped into an area whose job is now to put a communication umbrella over the wildland fire area, which, by the way, is huge and will move at speeds where you could cover easily 100 miles in a day in any direction. And so people who know radio, especially repeaters, you're talking maybe 30 miles or so, end to end. And so if your fire moves 100 miles, you've just set up a communication system over an area that's no longer an area of operation. So these teams of people are literally trying to stay ahead of the fire, and they move the communication system or the communication umbrella where they think the fire is going to be, so that it provides that communication umbrella to the first responders who are fighting the fire. What that means operationally is that the channels that are used can change every day. And so you can imagine your radio on day one having to be programmed with, I don't know, 5 or 10 channels or 16 channels if it's a fairly large fire. And then the next day, the channels have changed because new repeaters were brought online or new communities were brought online. And so every day, your programming of your radio needs to be updated. That's not something that normal or regular first responders have to deal with. You may reprogram your radio once a year. These guys are reprogramming their radios every day. And so BK Technology developed a technology called cloning, radio cloning. And basically you can take a cable and go from one BK radio to another and basically rapidly clone that radio. And so if you look at a large incident where you may have 5,000 or 6,000 firefighters and support staff, being able to update everyone's radio within a very short period of time is a challenge. But if you've got the cables and they're all using BK radios, doesn't matter what generation of radio, it actually happens very quickly in a matter of hours, where you have everyone that's associated with that fire has a new updated channel assignments. And so it's that cloning technology and the fact that we have, the majority of the radios out there that's really protected our space. So again, it's unique application, and it's something that we've dominated in the past.
Now, the frequencies in use are typically VHF, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. There's no UHF.
No.
No. Okay. So what do you see as the land mobile radio industry's long-term prospects? Because we got a lot of cellular-based services like FirstNet, Verizon's Frontline, and another one that I didn't actually think of at the time, but speaks to your umbrella concept is Starlink and other satellite-based services. How does all this mix together, and where is it going, would you say?
Well, I actually think it's quite an exciting time. When I was about 2010, I remember the first dialogue. This was like 3G time when LTE was first launched, and at that time I was working for Ericsson, and I remember the conversations at the product level where everyone immediately thought that land mobile radio was going to be expired, and these huge public networks with broadband connectivity would take over public safety communications. And so 15 years later, that quite hasn't quite happened yet, I would say. I think they got it right in terms of there is an evolution for public safety communications. I think that if you look at public safety communications today, a large chunk of their administrative communications and data support is over the commercial networks, over public networks. And so definitely cellular has provided an augmentation and provided additional capabilities to the first responders in the field. That's been very helpful. That's absolutely true. But land mobile radio, which is what they depend on for their critical voice communications, has not gone away. Now, if I look forward on it, do I see a day when private LMR networks start to decline and are fewer and are replaced by people choosing the public network? I think the short answer is yes. I do see that, and it's mainly because if you look at the cost associated with your private network to maintain it, the costs have just become astronomical, and they don't seem to be getting cheaper. And so project that out 10 or 15 years, it'll be at a point where the entities just can't afford the luxury of operating their own private network. And so I think those economics are going to drive more public safety agencies to strongly consider, how cellular or satellite or a combination of the two, how that can replace their critical voice communications that they're enjoying today. I can't put a timeline on that. I do think the networks are going to get replaced. I think that's true. The interesting thing is if I look at the device itself, the land mobile radio device, it has a unique capability that cellular lacks, right? If the network goes away, my cell phone is great for listening to music and looking at pictures, perhaps, that's stored on my phone, but it doesn't do much as a communications device to another cell phone. The advantage I think the land mobile radio devices has always had was the ability that if the network went away, that they could still communicate in a group, albeit over a shorter distance, but they could still communicate. And I think that's one of the characteristics of an land mobile radio device that's going to keep at least the devices themselves around for a lot longer than perhaps the networks will last. So a little bit of a long-winded answer, John. Sorry about that.
No, it was fine.
But my crystal ball is a little foggy.
So let's swing back to BK a little bit. You're a U.S.-based manufacturer, as far as I know, correct?
We are, yes.
So what are the challenges in that, in a world where a lot of people have been sending their radio equipment off to be assembled in Asia or in other places?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is that for all radio manufacturers, or I think electronics in general, right, parts are sourced globally, right? So the resistors, capacitors, chips, and different parts of Asia or different parts of the world certainly dominate in one technology or the other. But to say that all the components that make up a land mobile radio are manufactured in the U.S. is completely false. And so really it's an issue of where you do the assembly and to what level. And so, for example, on anything that's a relatively low cost, high labor content, Asia is usually a good place to manufacture. So we do a lot of our accessories out of Vietnam, for example. It's a lower cost, but high labor, and it makes more sense for us to go do that. In the case of our latest radio, the multi-band BKR 9000, we manufacture that in the facility in Melbourne, Florida, which is the facility in my background. But the components are sourced globally, and some of the sub-assemblies we get from different parts of the world as well. So I think that I think that there is advantages certainly in certain parts of the country, certain parts of the world, to do from an assembly standpoint. And I think in other cases, like what we've chosen, our flagship radio to be manufactured in our facility here in Melbourne, Florida, brings another flavor of it to our customers.
So when you say global sourcing of parts, of course, that brings up a whole nother issue, which is the tariff situation, which is pretty muddled right now. How does that impact your business?
Yeah, muddle is a good word. Yeah, I certainly, when we started this year, I didn't think that I'd be spending my time thinking about where all my parts were sourced and what tariffs we would be paying. Yet that's where I find most of my time spent this year. It's unfortunate. I'm hoping, obviously, that this thing settles down like every other business. It's just unfortunate. Tariffs are taxes, and taxes have to be paid by somebody, and usually it ends up being in our case, government agencies, because that's who our customers are, and that's just unfortunate.
Yeah, agreed. So, do you have any thoughts before we get to the audience questions, John, for the people listening, either people just entering the wireless industry or people that have been in it for a while, like you and I. Any any final thoughts before we get to questions?
So I think I mentioned this before, but I think we're at a very interesting time in wireless. So if I look at the last 40 years and what has happened in our industry, and then I project out the next 40 years, I think the next 40 years is going to be a magnitude more exciting to get involved. And so wireless is just impacting our daily lives. And I think that young people have an opportunity to bring their intellect and their energy to this industry and can transform our lives even more over the next 40 years. So I would certainly encourage anyone who has a passion for providing some sort of impact that this is one of the areas where they certainly can do. I certainly know my wife uses and talks to our grandchildren all the time using wireless devices. So something we didn't have that advantage growing up.
No, we did not. We did not. Okay, that's good. Barney, there are very few questions right now, so I would encourage the audience to please come up with some questions to ask John, because this is a wonderful opportunity to talk to a CEO of a major company and ask all the questions that you never thought you'd get that chance for. So Barney, I'm going to turn it over to you and let's see what happens.
Okay, I see one comment here that came up earlier. And John, never had a chance to thank you for the stupendous guided tour of prominent sites in New York and New Jersey, part of the technical or the RCA symposium. I guess that came from Carl KQ8G, an RCA fellow. That was a
yeah. Just to explain that one for those of you not aware, every year in November, RCA has its annual meeting and technical symposium, and we've in the past few years have been wrapping up interesting wireless tours. So last year we were in New York City. We changed the cities, and we had a tour of Info Tech, I think it was called. It's a huge museum in New Jersey. Very, very interesting. Then we went to AT&T, and we saw the radio telescope that was used for Explorer and some of the other early satellite work. It was really interesting. And then the next day we went to NYU Wireless. Dr. Ted Rappaport, who's a alumni of RCA. He got a graduate scholarship from us many years ago. And Ted is a big supporter of RCA, and we got a tour of the wireless labs, and the graduate students explained to us what we were doing. So that's for those of you that weren't there. That's what that's all about.
Okay.
Okay.
On to questions.
Yes.
From Jim Breakhall, just curious, John, if you have any relation to the Suzuki method in music.
I wish I did. Unfortunately, only my name.
Okay. Also, it was great to hear about taking an antenna course got you into wireless, since he taught antennas at Penn State. Was the antenna a Yagi?
It was, yes. And we actually, well, we had to design it, but we also had to build it. And so I got my welding techniques down as well as my design. Yeah.
Talking about your BK technologies, I see a lot of BK in fire, but not in law enforcement, where Motorola seemed to be on the market along with Harris. Your comments on market segmentation?
Well, I think the comment is correct. I mean, the history of the company has been associated with wildland fire. And I think with our newer radios, especially the BKR 9000, because it's a multi-band radio, what we're finding is more of the fire personnel who are familiar with our brand are now using the 9000 for their daily operations, which are more structure fired. So our hope is that as we get the brand in use more on a daily basis, that more law enforcement will see it. One of the other technologies, if I could just take a minute, John, that we've introduced is a push to talk over cellular service. We have a service that we launched called Interop One. So it runs, it's an over the top push to talk application. And that's an application I think is very applicable to law enforcement. One of the things that when I came back in the industry, I noticed when we looked at all these services, whether it's AT&T or Verizon or Motorola or L3Harris, there's about 9 or 10 different services out there. The interesting thing was if you talk to the users about push to talk over cellular, what is the thing that is lacking? What is the one thing that we could do that would make it better? They all said the thing that disappointed them most about the push to talk over cellular service is that each service is a silo service and that you can't communicate between the two, which seems absolutely ridiculous, right? Because the purpose of going to cellular was to have some sort of universal platform for communications. So today, John, you can share your phone number with me and I can call you, I can text you, but I can't set up a group call with you unless we're both a subscriber of that same service. And oh, by the way, there's 9 or 10 services. So which one do we choose? And so when we launched Interop One, the intent was to kind of break that paradigm. And so with Interop One, you can actually invite anyone who has a smartphone to participate in your group. And so, John, the next time you share your cell phone with me, who knows, maybe I'll invite you to one of my groups and we can have a group call over Interop One, regardless where you are in the industry. That type of functionality lends itself really well to law enforcement because law enforcement is all about unified commands, and the people that show up on an incident don't necessarily have a common set of communication equipment, but I guarantee you they all have a smartphone. And so our hope is that a service like Interop One and this Interop One feature will start to gain traction as we continue to market it to the first responder industry. And that will drive some more interest for our products.
That sort of is an answer to one of the questions almost. With the current situation of the Los Angeles riots, the parties are LAPD, CHP, National Guard, and U.S. Marines. What challenge do you think they are having to all keep in communication with each other?
Yeah, certainly getting on a common communication platform. I think with public safety, right, they tend to develop these unified commands, and then you have people all sitting in the same room, and then they all have their own devices. And so hopefully they're communicating, and then they pass on the communications in the field. That's how it's supposed to work, right? You can go during the presidential run in Pennsylvania, where there was a clear example where you had state police and the feds all at the same incident, and certainly weren't communicating, right? So a service like Interop One it's all about how easy it is to establish a communication. Today's traditional LMR radios, it's about exchanging radios and setting up groups, and it's a very laborious process to get everyone on the same page, right? Because it's all very structured, very planned. The problem is it's not flexible at all, and it's not quick to set up. With Interop One, as an example, people come with their smartphone, period. If you share your number with me, Barney, I can include you, I can extend my subscription to you, and in 5 minutes or less, we can all be talking on the same talk group. And it requires no training at all from the end user. That's what's exciting about it. And I think in the case of LA, a service like this would probably be helpful, not just within the law enforcement area, but think about the media, think about the mayor's office and all the communication that goes on. Today, it's all cell phones that are going off talking to each other. But I'm sure that a group of those individuals would love to be able to talk on a push-to-talk dispatch group so that they have immediate communications over a long period of time during that incident. So a feature like I think Interop One would be of great benefit to dealing with these unplanned events?
What is the footprint of BK technology? Is it national, international? Is your customer base all associated with forestry or fire? Are they all government agencies?
So I'm going to unpack that six-part question.
Okay.
So first, we do have a national presence. We're involved in all 50 states and I think most of the territories. Our primary customers tend to be the forestry customers because those are the ones that are responsible for maintaining the protection and the safety of our forests. So they tend to be BK customers as a whole. We do have a few international customers. Canada, for example, has had their fair share of wildland fires. Pretty much every state is a customer of BK as well. Once we get out of, I would say, Canada and the US, it's much more difficult. The technology that we promote on our products is Project 25. And although Project 25 is in a lot of other countries, it's not on the same scale as it is in the US and Canada. So we tend to focus our sales attention in North America. Although we do have some sales internationally, outside of North America, I should say. And all our customers are government agencies. Sorry, missed that one.
Are new LMR users asking for more of a cellular device user interface versus traditional handheld interface?
So I guess I have a very biased opinion on this, and I think it's because of how I was, brought up through the industry. I remember again going back in 2010 when Ericsson felt that cellular was going to rule the land mobile radio industry and take over public safety communications. My feeling at the time was for critical voice communications, that's completely different, right, than when you're making a cell phone call. First, law enforcement or first responders tend to operate in noisy environments. And so if you look at the form function of an LMR radio, it's designed to operate in loud environments because that's where our users operate. Cell phones, not so much, right? If you try to use your cell phone outside without a headset or something, it's pretty much very difficult to go do that. So I think they're just two applications. I think smartphones, for example, are great data devices. I do tons of applications on it. I actually dread making phone calls on my cell device, and I typically would have to have my earphones on, but it's a fantastic device for entertainment and pictures and videos and applications. But when it comes to critical voice communications, there's no better form factor than the land mobile radio. And I think that the industry recognizes that, and I think you see a lot of some of the newer manufacturers putting cell phone technology or cellular technology, LTE specifically, in an LMR package, because I think the first responders are comfortable with that package because it is still the best package for delivering that critical voice service for them.
One about the BKR 9000, his GPS GNSS capabilities. Can you comment on what complementary or alternative PNT technologies you would consider for your product?
Yeah, so all our BKR 9000 products come with GPS, with a GPS chip inside. So it's a standard feature with our radios, and that's actually becoming more involved, I think, in wildland fire. The ability to track all the wildland fires when they're on scene. We actually just recently launched a location service called Locate One. And it basically will take GPS data not only from a BK radio, but any land mobile radio device with a standardized GPS chip, but also a cell phone. And so from this one screen, Locate One screen, you can have multiple different users with different technologies to position their location.
There was another part of that. Any LMR or GPS interference stories you can share?
Yeah, I think the classic one that land mobile radio users have problems with in in urban centers is typically around cell towers, right? They're probably emitting the most energy, especially if you're operating at 800 megahertz on an 800 megahertz trunk system. You have a lot of cellular channels still in the 800 megahertz band, and so it can be problematic if you're operating your LMR radio near these cell towers. Now, technology has moved along quite a bit, and for example, our 9000, that was one of the environments that we were very conscious about, and we made sure that the radio had the filtering capability to operate right underneath the cell tower. So those are still some of the hazards, I would say, for LMR radios operating in cities. It's just the noise flow is higher, and if you're operating at 800 megahertz, it certainly, or 700, it can conflict with cellular. So you have to be careful in the products that you buy. Certainly test them out ahead of time.
Another question about your 9000 model. With an embedded upgradable cellular modem, the question begins, when might we see the 9000 with an embedded upgradable cellular modem? Here in Alabama and with our neighbors in Georgia, the utility operates a LTE network and has partnered with L3 to enable LTE services on the utility's network, allowing the LMR device to fall back to LMR. The state of Georgia has adopted broadband push-to-talk as their primary communication technology. Both M and L3 are the only manufacturers with embedded cellular modems. This severely limits public safety, the choice of other manufacturers' devices.
So I think that's an excellent question. I couldn't have planted that one myself. So I'm going to try and keep this answer as short as possible, right? So first, cellular is a great augmentation to land mobile radio. And the fact that you can operate on either LMR or cellular for critical communications, I think is fantastic. And I think it's nothing but an enhancement for public safety communications. The question is, how do I deliver that to that first responder? And so the answer from Motorola and L3 Harris is, because of the form factor, right? It makes sense to just add cellular inside my land mobile radio. And that's the path that they chose, right? I think there's some challenges with that. I think that cellular technology is moving quicker than the modems that you can put into these radios. I think that Samsung and Apple, you can't get a better radio platform for cellular than Samsung or Apple. I think from a processing power, you'll never be able to keep pace with them. And from an operating system and apps, of course, they rule the world, right? So you're trying to compete, in essence, against some pretty large giants, and you always fall short in what you're able to deliver. BK has taken a different approach, right? We do think that these devices, that we should be able to access the cellular network using your LMR radio, but we think the approach should be more of a tethering approach. So tether your existing smartphone with your BKR series radio. So the analogy that I use is, when you get into your car, do you use your cell phone, or do you connect it to your vehicle using CarPlay or Android Auto? And I think most people connect their cell phone to their vehicle using either CarPlay or Android Auto. Now that's different than Bluetooth, right? Because it's more than just audio. I can now use the navigation tool I want. I can use text messaging or iMessaging. Some of the apps are now transparent onto my big screen in my car. And so the thought here is that while I'm in my vehicle, I'm going to use my vehicle for communicating over my cell phone, and my cell phone will sit in my pocket or in the lap next to it. And when I get out of the vehicle, my phone comes with me. We've taken the same approach, right? Instead of putting the cell phone inside the land mobile radio device, what we've done is develop technology called BKR Play, which tether these devices together. And in essence, I can have a cell phone on my chest, which is where law enforcement typically will carry their cell phones, their smartphones. I can have my LMR device on my hip, and then I can rotate through my channel list so that On, say, for example, Zone A, I could be on the City of Atlanta trunk system. And then when I go out of range of that system, I can switch over to Zone B and I could be accessing a push to talk over cellular service like Interop One. And the way I'm accessing it is I'm connected to my smartphone, and my smartphone actually has that app operating on the cellular network. And so what that enables me to do is, as new generations of smartphones come to market, I can take advantage of that latest technology. For example, when we see satellite directed devices, will that operate with my current iPhone? Or will it work 10 times better with the latest generation iPhone that comes to market at the time that that service is more readily available? If I take the cellular technology and embed it in my radio, and that radio is good for 10 years, you know, how much more advancement can I make with that converged device versus if it was a tethered device and that smartphone gets changed every 2 or 3 years? We think that's just a smarter approach. Now, it's a completely different way of looking at things, but I can tell you from using this service, when I'm using like a speaker microphone, I can't tell the difference if I'm operating on a push-to-talk service or if I'm talking on a trunk system. In fact, the only way I could tell there's a difference is when you're talking on the cellular service, the voice quality is actually better than when you're operating on a P25 trunk system. So I think that these technologies absolutely augment each other. I just think the approach of integrating it into what I would call a converged device is a dead end technology path. And if you're really looking at how do I best take advantage of cellular technology, it's through a tethering approach, because then you're leveraging the power of Apple and Samsung.
There was a sort of a counter comment to that. The tethering use case doesn't work for public. The question just moved up the screen. The tethering use case doesn't work for public safety. Think battery life of your smartphone not being as robust as the LMR device. I would encourage you to reconsider this approach, and happy to follow up offline for more feedback.
Absolutely. Please provide my contact. And I would say that, look, there's a variety of tools that public safety will be looking. And I'm sure that there are plenty of first responders that will buy a converged device. I think that there's an entire market out there that perhaps may use cellular for 5% of their service and looking at it as an augmentation. And I think a tethering approach is a much more cost-effective solution. So I'm not advocating that this is the one solution for first responders. I'm suggesting that this is a alternative approach that's certainly much more cost-effective, and it has certain other benefits.
Okay, switching gears a little bit because this has popped up twice now. Do you have any thoughts about the legacy of the Florida Space Coast and various historical employers and resources, e.g. Countdown College Radiation, Inc., on the contemporary climate for technology companies in the area?
I don't think I should touch that one. Certainly, BK Technologies is part of the Space Coast. We're located in Melbourne, Florida. But I don't have the history, I would say, to comment on that question, Barney.
To switch a slightly different direction, do you have any? Well, where'd the question go? It popped up off the screen, but it had to do with: do you think artificial intelligence will have any effect in the industry? And I would even ask, do you see anything else like AI that is going to have a big influence in the future?
Yeah, I think cellular in general. So things that drive innovation and different services go back 10 years, right? LTE was first introduced. The amount of mobile data that was out in the field in first responders was relatively limited. Why was it limited? Because you didn't have a broadband connection and the devices were customized, and were expensive, right? So now you have LTE, you have broadband connections. lower cost, you've got standardized PCs in the vehicles. And today, it's hard to think back when you weren't connecting a first responder vehicle to the cellular network and providing real-time data, right, to the first responders who makes them more efficient and it makes them safer. Okay, so let's extend that now. When the first responder steps out of the vehicle, what does he have? He has his land mobile radio, okay, but he also has a smartphone. Right? And these smartphones today, processing power, and then the applications on top of that, plus its broadband connection. So it has as much power as what you can put in a vehicle in a handheld device in terms of broadband connection, and processing power is as powerful. When you have those combinations of connectivity and processing power, you have the ability to start to take advantage of what AI can bring to new services. And that's going to impact public safety in ways that we hadn't thought about today. But with those base technologies, there is no doubt that we will see in 5 or 10 years technology or new services being brought to first responders because of AI and because of these smartphones.
Okay.
Barney, let's take one or two more, then I think we got to wrap it.
Okay. I'm trying to decide which one to go with here. I see a lot of interesting ones. Let's go with this one. Given that GPS can be jammed, what alternative bands or techniques would a handheld LMR radio supplier incorporate into its products?
Yeah, I think that's too broad of a question, Barney, because
They
it really
go on a little bit further. Can you comment on current FCC requirements for information on GPS alternatives as they affect your products?
Yeah, no, I don't think
Okay.
I'm prepared to talk about that.
More specific question, is Interop One a subscription service? Does BK support multiple servers for Interop One? Are the voice services logged?
Yeah, so Interop One is a hosted service that BK offers. It's actually hosted in the Azure cloud, and it's backed up at 2 different physical locations. There is the capability to do voice logging, and that's just a service that we offer the customer. I think the idea of Interop One, just if I can finish up on this, John, was really to break the paradigm, right? I mean, cellular was promised to be the utopia or the holy grail for interoperable communications. If you remember 9/11 and the report about not being able to do voice communication, that spun FirstNet and the $45 billion they spent with AT&T. Yet, if you look at the state of interoperable communications today using cellular, it's no different than it was back in 2001, right? And so I think the sad truth. Interop One breaks that paradigm, right? By the ability it was a service that was designed to bring people together. If you have a smartphone, I can form an ad hoc talk group immediately, whether you are a subscriber or not. I, as the host, have to be a subscriber, but you, as my guest, does not. And I think that type of service, that type of feature, will help the cause for interoperability on cellular. And I think that you will see this capability brought out by other services, because that's really getting to the point of interoperability and having people to easily talk over a common platform. And that's what I think the value of Interop One is, and the feature it's going to bring.
Well, it sounds like you have a very good solution to the alternative of having to choose one of 9 services. That is crazy. John, I want to thank you very much for joining us. I want to remind everybody that RCA will be at APCO in July 27th to the 30th in Baltimore. We got, Amy told me we got a nice, much larger booth space. There'll be a reception, typical RCA reception on Monday. All of that information is available on our website. I also want to remind people that Our annual meeting this year is going to be in Washington, D.C. in November, and you all should look forward to that. Those of you that live on the East Coast, D.C. is pretty easy to reach. So we hope to see you there. John, thank you so much. This has been very educational and informative. We got into a lot of different areas. Barney, thank you for your usual expertise in fielding the questions to our interviewee. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice summer. And we got 2 more of these coming up for the rest of the year. So take care and watch for the email announcements.